Welcome to You Should Have Been Here Last Week. And this is a podcast done by two comedians. My name's Paul Ricketts. I've been a comedian of years standing. And I should introduce my fellow host, Steve Gribbin. Introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Steve Gribbin. I am also a comedian, and I've been going for years.
Yes, and there's a reason.
We don't say how long we've been going, do we?
No, because I think you were saying to me, I'll have to let you say it, as we discussed.
No, it's because every time you get into a car with a much younger actor and they say, so how long have you been doing it? If you say anything over 25 years, this look of horror passes over their face, doesn't it?
Yeah.
As if they think, well, what are you still doing going down to Taunton? Because I won't be doing this in 10 years' time. I'll be hosting a game show on television. You can tell it in their faces, can't you?
Yeah, and of course it never does happen after time. Most of them don't last 5 years. You given up and got a job in Tesco's.
Yeah,
it just didn't work out for them.
Yes, what a shame.
So we are doing this particular podcast, which is going to be about promoters who I think who are slightly weirder than comedians themselves. I started off as a promoter. I don't think you've ever done any promotion, have you, Steve?
I certainly have. In the mid-'80s, we did, me and Brian, my partner in Skin Video, ran a comedy club at South Bank Poly in Waterloo, and it only lasted probably about 6 to 8 months, and I would never do it again, ever, because I got, there was one famous night where none of the acts turned up, and we had to do an extended set and then call in a favour from two of our friends because one had a car crash. To this day, I'm not sure if they had a car crash or not.
Have the car crash outside the room. That's probably a lot of comedians wait till they get to the gig for that.
The reason we're doing this is we are. I don't think it's ever been done before. People have asked promoters what their motivation is, or how they got started, and it is a little bit like comedians and promoters don't really talk to each other. It's a bit like the infamous mods versus rockers, or we're not supposed to mix, are we? But yeah,
it's a symbiotic relationship, though, isn't it? I mean, without them, there is no us, and of course, without us, there is no them.
I know. Are we like? I don't know whether we're the fish that nibble away at their toes.
Oh no, I was going to think. I was going hand in glove, but who's the glove?
I think the glove. No one wants to be the glove.
Yeah. So yes, the first person we're going to talk to is Spiky. He runs over 50 clubs across the East Midlands, some in the South. I mean, his clubs. He's been doing them now for 20 years. They've just had the anniversary, and he's won the Best Midland Comedy Club Award twice, and with the leading comedy website Chortle and the Midland Comedy Awards. Yeah, Spiky Mike, first person we're going to talk to, and here comes the interview. I introduce you, Spiky Mike. You have no second name in comedy. You just are Spiky Mike. No one knows what your real surname is. So why Spiky?
Throughout the 90s and most of the noughties, I had bleached hair a la Billy Idol, and I DJ'd throughout that period. And I was doing a club in Sheffield in the mid-90s, and I was away on holiday in pre-mobile phone days, and the promoter of the gig decided that we ought to not have any real names on there because he wanted to do everything cash in hand. And so he assigned a name to me for the posters, and it's stuck ever since.
So you were just named Spiky Mike by some other promoter?
Yeah, using my real name for DJing. In the early days of doing comedy, people who came to my DJing nights were quite a few of my audience. Yes, and as you know, Paul, when you start out at comedy and you're shit, everyone wants to come and see you, and once you get any good at it, no one wants to come along anymore.
Yeah, I never invited anybody when I started because I knew I was shit then. And now that I'm good,
I invite loads of people.
No, they still don't come. This is the chance for you to advertise your enterprise. I mean, you might as well give the name.
Funhouse Comedy Clubs.
And how long have they been going?
Well, it will be 20 years next year. So we're going to be having a big load of anniversary stuff going on, and a very, very, very special show that we're going to be live streaming to the world at the beginning of January, which we will be announcing in the next month or two.
Oh, right. Okay, that sounds exciting. Possible bookings. And
You're not famous enough.
well, obviously I'm not. As the people watching this will know, who the hell is that man? So, did you start off to become a comedian or to become a comedy promoter?
I started out as an act. In the 90s, I used to go to Just the Tonic every week. And then they did a new act night, and I thought, I'll give it a go. And it was all right, but I didn't really get that many laughs. So I thought I'll do it again, but not until I've written some more material. And then I did it again about a year later, and it went amazingly well. Which at the time I thought was because I was a natural comedy genius, but subsequently realised that the compere had bigged me up massively, and had got the audience to really get behind me, as I tend to do with first-timer acts now as well. So yes, I started out as an act, but the perceived wisdom of the good people of the Chortle forums in those days that you'll remember, Paul, was that there were way fewer clubs running then than there are now. And it was hard, even if you were happy to travel all over the country, to do more than one gig a week as a new act. And the general advice everyone gave was, if you want to get more stage time, was set up your own club. So I did so, and I set up a monthly club at the Leicester Princess Charlotte, as was then. And the reason I chose that venue was because it was a very popular live music venue, and I thought, they've got an audience of people who go to live events.
And so what do you prefer now? Performing? Because you still actually MC your nights.
Yes, I compare. I don't really ever do sets nowadays. I did enjoy doing them, but I don't particularly like driving a lot. So I tend to do gigs that are all within an hour of home. Comparing and running shows appeal to me. And I think I'm probably better at comparing now anyway. Well, that's maybe because that's all I've done virtually for the last 10 years.
Okay, I'll put it another way. What if you had to stop promoting because of a terrible accident and fire in a East Midlands venue which killed, let's say, some animals, no humans, just the cat died, right? So you can't promote anymore. There's a ban, but you can perform. Would that be satisfying to you, or would you like it the other way round?
Well, I obviously I prefer performing, but financially I would earn more money from promoting. So, yeah, from a point of view of keeping my children fed, I'd rather be a promoter.
Well, at least you're taking your ego out of this. And obviously no animals were really hurt in that sort of made-up thing that I just said. So, what gives you the most amount of pleasure when putting on a comedy night?
When you just see an audience laughing lots, crying with laughter, and when you see loads of comedy, also the little things that happen that don't happen every gig. If you get a really funny heckle or something different that happens in a room beyond what you might see on Live at the Apollo, those sort of magical things that happen are the best things of all.
So what gives you the most aggravation about putting on a night?
Do you know, I'm quite chilled about it. Acts cancel all the time, which a lot of promoters get annoyed about, but it doesn't actually bother me that much. To me, it's just a fairly integral part of it. If you're going to get that bothered about acts cancelling, then you're in the wrong job, because a lot of acts cancel. Probably 25% of acts you've got on any bill. To me, it's just part of the job.
Anything that you wish you knew before you started all of this?
No, not really. I don't think I've made too many stupid mistakes over the years. I started off very low budget. There was a lot of people advising when I first started, get pro acts on and put full pro nights on. And actually, I think that was would have been a really bad idea. And I ignored that advice because I think I'd have just lost loads of money. Yeah. And so I started on a very low budget gig. I paid headliners 30 quid, and which was fine. It was good for practicing becoming a compere, and it's good for practicing becoming a promoter, because if you're not experienced as a promoter, you probably won't be very good at it, and you'll just lose loads of money. So I think it's better to start low budget, build up, and then when you get good at promoting, or you've built up a bit of an audience, then you up your budget and get higher level acts in.
So there's the whole thing about, when do you expand? Because you started off with, how long did you just have the one club?
About a year, and then I got asked to do the Blessington Carriage, which is still running. So that was launched 20 years ago as well. And then I think somebody gave me a couple of clubs after that. He said he'd got a couple of quite popular clubs that were pulling big crowds, but his day job was too busy, and he gave me Ashby La Zouch. It wasn't actually the venue we're in now, but it was quite a good venue. But that's turned out to be our premier town, and so that was very lucky. But he sort of handed it to me because the previous two gigs have both been quite low budget. So I think that was our third or fourth club, and so we gradually started building. I didn't really. I think initially you sort of chase clubs, but then after you develop a bit of a reputation, venues start contacting you. They hear, oh yeah, I see you doing a club, in the next town. Could you do it to our venue? And nowadays, that's all that ever happens. I never chase venues. I just wait and see if they want to contact us to run shows.
So how many venues you got at the minute?
It is hovering fairly close to 50 now.
50?
Yeah, it's in the high 40s. I didn't really want to take on many more. I was being quite selective, but I'm fearing that venues may shut down if they can't afford their gas and electric bills. I was kind of thinking, I may as well just take everything that's on offer. I do fear that some venues are not going to survive this winter. So I think on the plus side for venues, because some pubs now, they need to be busy all week to pay for these higher costs. There may be a lot of pubs that think, we make our money at the weekend. We're not that desperate to do stuff. Whereas I think now more venues are looking for things to fill the whole week up. So particularly some of the more proactive venues. I think independent venues tend to be more proactive than the chains. Nearly all venues we deal with are independent ones. When I'm starting to get busier and I don't want to do, take on ridiculous amounts of work, I tend to start being selective about doing smaller ones.
Well, there's two questions, really. I mean, how do you establish a new gig and to make certain it's successful? And the other one is, when do you drop a new gig when you think, well, this isn't working?
Well, I don't really ever drop them. In the last 10 years or so, every gig we've taken on has been on a fixed fee basis. And so basically you get paid for running the gig and then you get paid for paying the acts. So basically it's really down to the venues whether or not they want to keep running it, because it's, whether they're making money on it.
Well, you've earned the right to be in that sort of slightly more protected situation.
Yeah, I mean, the ones I've been running since the early days, I've got about half a dozen that I promote myself, but they're all well established. So I've not had to make a decision to shut any of them. I mean, the ones I've been running for ages are Grantham and Ashby and Derby Blessington and the Gong shows.
So I take it for new acts who want to get in front of you, the best thing is to try and do your Gong night.
Yeah, if they're fairly new, the Gong night, anyone can do that. We tend to give 10 spots to acts that are quite well established, that are starting to break into paid work, because the 10 spots we tend to use to find acts that will get put into paid spots on the bigger clubs.
So when you do your Gong show, do you still do your famous brutal feedback?
Sometimes, depends. It's not all that like it, but I remember an act who did a Gong show, and then he won his Gong show, and then he did a few 10 spots for me, and every time he did the 10 spot, he would do a totally different 10, and as I said to him, I think you'd be better honing one 10 spot and improving it rather than just totally changing it every time. He completely ignored me, but his name was James Acaster and he did all right. So.
Well, there you go. I mean, that's the lesson there. If you want to be really successful, ignore Spiky Mike.
Yeah, pretty well.
What's the best comedy performance you've seen on your stage?
I think, Rod Gilbert I've been fortunate enough to have him doing previews before pretty well every tour he's done. And they've always been absolutely ridiculously amazing. But the other one that really, really stood out was the one and only time I ever managed to book her. But Nina Conti did a tour preview at Ashby Lazouche, and that was just absolutely mind-blowingly brilliant.
And what's the worst? You don't have to name names with the worst. You can just sort of tell me how bad it was. What struck you about the worst performance?
I remember there was one guy who came to a gong show in Leicester, and he was doing sort of magic incorporated in his gig, and absolutely everything that could have gone wrong went wrong, and he was dropping props all on the floor, and then they rolled down between the seats and he couldn't get them back. It was just bad beyond belief. But really, as a promoter, you tend to remember acts being really bad when you've paid them. So, but if you pay an act, if they're a headline act and they're terrible, or they've been really offensive and massively misread the room, or abused the audience because they weren't doing well, those are the ones that, as a promoter, really stick.
Have you got any tips for aspiring promoters?
Well, I think the thing I said earlier about not overcommitting is important. Just make sure you treat acts well. You want them to play for you again. You want the feedback to other acts to be that it's a nice venue. Make sure that, the room is set up well, the right number of chairs are out, that you don't put too many chairs so that no one's sat anywhere near the front. Make sure the bar know that they've got to, be quiet. Make sure the bar is or the venue is going to be supporting the night. It's worth its weight in gold when the venue is supporting it and they're putting posters up or telling their regulars about it. It's better to go to a less good venue that has really enthusiastic landlord than it is to go to a really good room where they're not bothered about it. And also, I think, to an extent, if you're going into a pub function room, make sure you're going into the sort of pub where the clientele of the people in that pub are the type of people you'd want in your comedy night. And the audience that you want to attract need to be comfortable going to the gig as well.
Yeah.
I think those are a few things that leap out. And make sure that your PA and lights and stuff are decent enough for the room you've got. People need to hear properly. If you've got a crappy mic that cuts out, a cheapy radio mic or something, and it keeps cutting out, you're not going to, it doesn't matter who your comedian is, it's going to be a terrible gig.
How and when should comics approach you for gigs?
We have a form on our website that's headed "Want a Gig." So we just ask a few questions on there, where they're based, where they drive, things like that. Because for newer acts, particularly in gong shows, we'll try and arrange lift shares, particularly nowadays with the price of petrol. If you want anything above a gong show, make sure you've got a video, and get a decent video as well that's actually got 5 or 10 minutes. What I really don't like is show reels where they, little bits of clips and stuff like that. They're just rubbish. Just watch the video now. For someone asking for a full paid spot, not even a low progression spot, and there's like a 2-minute video clip started halfway through the video, and you think, why are you not showing the rest of that video? Is that the only bit? Is that the only bit that got a laugh? You want to see how you introduce yourself on the stage and things like that. So probably at least 5 minutes. If you're trying to get a pro spot, then you've got to be probably putting at least 10 minutes on, and make sure it's decent quality as well. There's quite a few videos where there's a phone at the back of the room, and I'm struggling to hear it, or get the subtitles on at least if the quality's not so good. And sometimes people send you a video from 3 years ago, and you think, have you died at every gig since then? Well, I mean, if that one video happens to be amazing, and it's a really top club or something, fair enough. But if it's off some Nokia 3610 or something, then
So could you describe your typical audience member?
Well, we have a lot of gigs that are in small towns and villages. We don't have that much in big cities. So I think we have more of an older clientele than a lot of clubs. So probably most of our audiences are largely over 40 and quite coupley, and probably mostly white audiences, because we are more sort of villages and smaller towns. We've got hardly anything actually in city centres, so that we've got very different demographics, I think, to a lot of the big city clubs.
What changes have you seen in the world of comedy promotion over the years?
One godsend has been the fact that everyone's got videos now. Back in the day, when you had to rely on chortle reviews or how creative people could be on their CVs, you sometimes got some real turkeys where somebody would turn up and you think, how the hell have I booked them? How did they slip through the net? But I mean, the standard has gone up massively over the last 20 years because there's probably 20 times as many people doing comedy. And there's probably 10 times as many clubs. When you think, when I started out, Nottingham had Just the Tonic on a Sunday night. That was the only comedy club in the city. There must be 20 clubs running now. And there are so many people doing comedy now. I mean, literally count on the fingers of one hand the number of people that were doing comedy in a city the size of Nottingham 20 years ago. Whereas now, there's loads of people. It also makes it more affordable to do now because you don't have to travel long distances. When I started, you couldn't even just do one gig a week. You were traveling 100 miles to do a lot of them.
So what about as competition? I mean, it's more gigs, it's more competition.
There is more competition for sure, but there are way more gigs. So yeah, I think it's harder to get to the higher level. I mean, when I started, straight away, new acts would get put on to get given a 5 or 10 minute slot on pro bills. My first 10 gigs, I think 9 of them were pro gigs. You didn't really get open mic gigs then, hardly at all. Whereas now, for any act to get onto a pro bill, they've got to have probably won a gong show and then been given 10 spots at small gigs. A lot of the 10 spots now, if they do a pro gig, are going down really, really well. Whereas when I was doing it, it was probably more a sympathy laugh.
I think what you said was probably right. I think what happens is, you might even notice this, that you get more acts that are so tailored towards London because there's so many gigs, or tailored to the Northwest because there's so many gigs, or tailored to the East Midlands. And when they move out of those areas, suddenly it doesn't go over as well.
I don't know. I mean, I like to have acts from various places. I think the more variety on a bill you get, the better. And it's not easy to get that much variety sometimes, especially when you're out of the cities and in more provincial areas. Getting diverse bills is tricky in all respects. Very hard to get female acts. All promoters, although the TV and Live at the Apollo has put a lot of female acts on the bill, at grassroots entry level, it's about 1 in 10, the same as it's been for 20 years. We get probably most gong shows one or two at best female acts on the bill, sometimes none at all, which is always disappointing. One area that I think diversity has been very good is disability.
Yeah,
there's a lot of disabled acts on the circuit, quite a number with cerebral palsy, and obviously blind acts and deaf acts, all a lot of different disabilities. That's been a good positive development for sure.
Are there any comedy promoters that you admire?
Well, I have to have massive admiration for what the guys at Hot Water in Liverpool have done. I mean, it's just, I've not played there myself, but just from what I've seen and heard about the things they do, they've been mind-blowing. I think they've been real trailblazers on the circuit, and it's hard to actually admire other comedy promoters that much because you don't tend not to go to any other clubs. So you don't really see comedy elsewhere, or certainly because I've got lots of clubs. I'm at my own clubs all the time, so I never really get a chance to see anyone else's. But yeah, I think Hot Water are probably the ones that stand out.
Well, yeah, they've definitely changed the business, and it's their sort of social media activities, which I think lots of people and
yes,
everyone's getting better cameras put into their clubs, and that's down to them.
Yes, yeah. Not just for security now.
Yeah, exactly. So how do you see the future of stand-up? You've got about 4 minutes to answer this. I've got no pressure at all, but just see this as a 5-minute spot and you're running out of time.
I don't know. I just sort of keep doing what I'm doing. And yeah, as you said, the social media thing is going to get progressively more important than your TV credits because the kids tend to watch, that look at their phones more than they look at the TV. So If you've got a big social media following, that's quite possibly going to be worth more than being on Live at the Apollo. People filming their shows and putting content online is going to be more and more important to getting built up as a good comic. I mean, I don't like to. A lot of our clubs, I don't particularly try and book acts. Only the very biggest ones where I think I need to have TV acts because it will help sell, some extra tickets. But most importantly, I try and get acts that are funny.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things about your clubs is that the audience trust you as the person picking the acts, which is a strong position to be in as a promoter.
Yeah, because obviously, as we know, acts cancel quite a bit. And when you've got a TV act on, sometimes you can't replace them with a TV act. You have to replace them just with whoever's available. And we find that even when we have, quite high profile acts on, if they cancel, we get very few people wanting refunds. Vast majority will still turn up and they know they'll have a great show. That's probably the most important thing really as a promoter, to be able to always put strong shows on so the audience trusts you and will turn up.
Well, yeah, congratulations on the 20 years.
Thank you.
And I think I've still got 30 or 40 of your clubs still to do. So that's good news.
Surely not.
And, thanks for being on the show. I'll speak to you later.
Thank you, Paul. Good to have a chat.
So, yes, that was Spiky Mike. And you might have noticed it was just me that was talking to Spiky, mainly because we decided that we shouldn't really have someone who wasn't booked by the promoter interview the promoter, because obviously the first question you want to ask that promoter is, why don't you book me?
Yeah, give us a gig.
So that's why I talked to him. But, I mean, it's turned out all right, though, isn't it? It's turned out fine.
It turned out all right. Well, at the time, he didn't book me, and now he is booking me. So that's the power of this podcast. That's how powerful it's become.
Even after we've never even released an episode, but already we've done better out of it. It's earned us money.
I'm playing Grantham, baby. Woo!
Who wouldn't be pleased with that?
I can't wait. Yeah.
And the other thing I think we should finish on is lexicon of comedy words and phrases. For one thing, we call people who aren't comedians audience members, punters, civilians sometimes we call them.
Yeah.
And
arseholes.
Arseholes, we call them when we're in the car. And one of my favourite ones, what comics do, is gig maths.
Well, that's the process whereby you tot up what the promoter is charging as a ticket price on the door and what he's actually paying out, or he or she, I should say, are paying out. And then you look at the discrepancy and then a bomb explodes in your head and you go, what the living fuck? We're being shafted sideways. I mean, I'm not saying that applies to all gigs, obviously, but
I think it's a terrible thing to do. I'm really against, because I've seen so many comics that walk on stage and will just be counting. Instead of performing, you can see them just going, 10 rows, 15 people in each row, £25 a ticket. I'm only on about one, huh? And it's affecting what you're doing.
But that's why
maths.
Other comics, if they're in the show, they will tell you anyway. I mean, that I first heard that phrase. Must be about 15 years ago, and I was doing an art centre somewhere in the south of England, in Sussex somewhere, shall we say. And the Stuart Francis, the Canadian guy, who's since now done his farewell tour, hasn't he? Me and another act, I think it was Man with a Beard, actually. So was Kevin McCarthy.
Oh, I thought there was an act called Man with a Beard.
Yeah, that's what it used to be called. He used to go under the name of Man with a Beard. Yeah. And we were sat there in the dressing room moaning about the fact that it was there were a series of Christmas gigs, and they were all paying about £25 a ticket, and we were all on poxy money, and we were going mad, And just Stuart Francis came, hey guys, he said, don't do the gig math, because obviously North American, don't do gig math because that way lies madness. And he was right. You shouldn't do it.
And you got a story about gig maths in another comedy club.
Yeah. This is a comedy club, which shall be nameless. But again, it's a Christmas gig situation. They were all paying, £25 a ticket, and the acts got together. There was 4 acts on the bill, and Smug told me that he was incandescent with rage and said, "Right, we're going upstairs to challenge the promoter." But as they were on the stairs, one of them turned around and just said, "Just so you know, before we go in the room, I will fold." So that was no point in going in the end.
turned back down the staircase.
Went down the stairs like that. Going, okay, well, that's it then. I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? You know, because
and it's in the end, we are all sort of single soul traders, and so you know, a single. Well, it's a lack of unity amongst us, really, when it comes down to it.
I thought you were going to get very deeply philosophical there. So we were all single souls.
Yeah, I was going along that line.
The cosmos.
Yeah, floating away, sort of trying to find something to latch onto.
Yeah, and our last words will be, "Who books that?"
I think that's a good point to finish this podcast. As always, I think you should always say with any podcast, and also I think this will be edited up and put on YouTube. So subscribe and like and all the rest of the stuff you're supposed to do. We haven't got any merchandise, so we might sell some old underpants or something like that we've got lying around. But if you've enjoyed this, tell your friends, and hopefully we'll see you in the next one.
They said you should have been in line.